Hey, good morning. It is Monday, March 30th, 2020. I was just heard this morning that our stay-at-home policy, stay-at-home guidelines, things like that have been extended through the end of April, I believe it is. I want to put some perspective around some of this for you this morning. But when we talked last, I talked about maintaining a positive perspective, maintaining a positive life stance. That includes, understanding that there is good and bad in this world, and that some of that good and bad is some of that good is going to find me, some of that bad is going to find me. Uh, and the part of that is what I can do is choose how I will respond to any bad. I think I also said, what is wrong is always available to us, but so is what is right. And so making a conscious decision to choose what is right. And also used a couple of examples. Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for some 24, 25 years, and then was released and became the president of the country. And and how he did it was, you cannot imprison greatness. We also talk about, remember Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, the man that lost everything in World War II, spent the duration of the war in Auschwitz or another concentration camp, watched his family killed, the physical abuse, the mental abuse, the emotional abuse, and how that was one thing that he could always determine, was that how he would respond. He always had that choice. But I want to share with you today something that came up now, especially with this extension of the guidelines of some people that some of them I've met, some of them I haven't. But I want to talk to you about the Stockdale Paradox. Stockdale refers to Admiral James Stockdale, who was shot down over Vietnam and spent over 7 years as a prisoner of war. He was the highest ranking officer over there during that time. I'll get to that in a minute, but I found a quote that I think really sums up some things right here by F. Scott Fitzgerald, that says, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas at the same time and still retain the ability to function." I, that's really critical here in our thinking, because so many times we hear about, I will not allow negativity in my life. I will not allow negative thoughts in my life. Heck, I even say that you're always one thought away from a positive or a negative. But I think there's some things to be learned here if we look a little bit deeper into Viktor Frankl, Nelson Mandela, James Stockdale, and a few others that I'm going to introduce you to here in just a second, and learn some lessons from these right here, from these people who have been through situations which at this point right now certainly seem to be far worse than anything that we're going through. So in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, he actually talks about what has now been called the Stockdale Paradox. You can find that if you've got a copy of the book, you can find it on pages 83 through 87. But here's the Stockdale Paradox. Stockdale Paradox is: retain faith that you will prevail regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time confront the most difficult, brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they are. Now, remember the other day I did say that Max Dupree said that the leader's first responsibility is to define reality. Well, I cannot imagine what Viktor Frankl, Nelson Mandela, Charlie Plum, and another fellow I'll talk about in just a second. I cannot imagine. I can read about what they went through, and but I cannot imagine the actual part of it. It's just not within me. But I can learn from their experience. I can evaluate their experiences and apply it to me. So what we're going through currently right now, while highly contagious and deadly, we are in essence in prison, and don't exactly know when we're going to get out. That's, if nothing else, we're a prisoner of our own mind. Let me read to you from Collins' book, Good to Great. You'll find this in the middle of page 85. This is Collins. When I say I, this is Collins talking. He says, I didn't say anything for many minutes, and we continued the slow walk around the faculty club. Stockdale, limping and arc swinging his stiff leg that had never fully recovered from repeated torture. Finally, after about 100 meters of silence, I asked, who didn't make it out? Oh, that's easy, he said. The optimist. The optimist? I don't understand. I said, now completely confused, given what he had said 100 meters earlier. The optimists. Well, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, and Christmas would come, and then we're going to be out by Easter, and Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. So after a long pause and more walking, then he turned to me and said, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal fact of your current reality, whatever they might be. And to this day, I carry a mental image of Stockdale admonishing the optimist in prison with him in the Hanoi Hilton. We're not getting out by Christmas. Deal with it. That's leadership. But what I'm finding more and more, as I've referred to here, is that more and more of the lessons and teachings of the past, people who've had experiences that we can draw from and evaluate their experiences and apply them to ourselves. But teachings of the past, far and near, even the Greek philosophers, the Stoics, they call this premeditation malorum, which means the premeditation of evil. These things are available to those of us that are willing to look at them and take action. In other words, it's one thing to read this stuff and know know about it. When we apply it, we'll know it. Anyway, this coronavirus thing is definitely the type of disruption that many authors, including Jim Collins and others, wrote about. Well, Collins wrote about it specifically in Good to Great. So I really do invite you to read pages 83 through 87. Read the whole book. It's really outstanding. But this is about, and learn about James Stockdale, who was eventually did get out and was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his leadership, sacrifice while a prisoner and during all kinds of awful things. But this is very poignant to us who are essentially prisoners in our home, prisoners in our own mind. And we don't really know when we're going to get out. And we most certainly have more resources available to us right now than the other 591 prisoners released by North Vietnam of nearly coming up on 47 years than they had. They had to create, they had to get really ingenious in their stuff, and that's all detailed in Collins' book. But here's the point. Decades later, Stockdale described his time as a POW as a defining event in his life and one he wouldn't trade. Suffering can't be eliminated, but we can choose how we will bear the burden. So, so that's when he said, the optimist. So it turns out, and it's very counterintuitive, that there's something about being a pessimist that can give you critical tools to cope when the worst happens. And not just cope, but I'm talking about survive, thrive, and succeed when the worst happens. Now, it isn't about making yourself miserable. It's more about rehearsing your response. I remember in my Marine Corps days, my drill instructor would scream at us about the 7 Ps, which was proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And even in more modern times, and a little bit more eloquently put in John Maxwell's plan ahead acronym, the E down in plan ahead in the head, the E was to expect problems. So once you've got the critical tools, you'll actually feel more prepared, knowing that you have those tools to cope, survive, thrive if the worst happens. It's call it building up a secret stockpile of confidence that nothing can get through. call it mental survival training. We can learn a lot from the prisoners of war from the Vietnam era, as well as other sources. But that's why I wanted to do that. Now, I actually met, I never met Admiral Stockdale, but I did meet several years ago another POW named Charlie Plum. If you've ever heard the term or the saying, "Who packed your parachute?" Well, that comes from here. This comes from Charlie Plum's book. I actually met him. He was speaking to a group of bankers, and he had, and after, while we were applauding, he was pacing the stage. I think it was 6 or 7 paces, and he turned around and paced back. And what he was doing was pacing the width, the longest part of his cell. That's and where he spent solitary confinement for God knows how many years. But Charlie's book, I'm No Hero, is really wonderful. And I also met while on active duty in the Marine Corps, and I do not remember the man's name. I remember him a major, and but he was also a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And I met him at 29 Palms, California. He was teaching a class, just sharing his experience. And what I remembered seeing, what I remembered him telling, what stands out more is one, he had this little gym bag or duffel bag that was issued to them. And inside that bag, he showed his possessions while he was there, one of which was a deck of cards. And towards the end, when they were finally allowed to interact with each other very quietly, he described playing cards. And I don't remember the card game they were playing, but he said that nobody was ever in a hurry. They were intentionally deliberate and slow in their shuffling of the cards, in the dealing of the cards, and the playing of the cards. And what he did was that when we were able to get together, we didn't cram in the time we had, how many games or how many hands we could play. We made every moment last, because we still did not know, no matter how the incremental improvements got, they never allowed themselves to be totally positive about what was going on and cherished every moment that they had together. In Plum's book, he talks about poetry and the value of poetry. And at the end of chapter 15, he said poems being passed through the code that they had to communicate amongst the prisoners in their individual cells. He said the poems were not only entertaining, but also meaningful. I remember vividly the night I heard and memorized William Ernest Henley's Invictus, which represented so well our circumstances and our feeling. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond the place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Now, it said that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the second best time to plant a tree is right now. There's a lot of people to be grateful for right now. Medical, sanitation workers, grocery store workers, truck drivers, farmers, warehouse workers, law enforcement, our military, people that keep the lights going, people that keep the plumbing going, and I'm just very, very grateful for those. So I encourage you to take advantage of the massive amounts of resources that we have available to you right now that other people didn't have, and learn from their experience and apply it to your own life. Another thing I'll add is that nobody ever does anything great alone, and so reach out. One of the resources is any number of coaches, myself, others, it doesn't matter, to reach out that can be able to support you, to help you look at to gain a new perspective on what's going on. Just remember, you're the captain of your soul. Be safe, be well. Take care.